So thanks very much. I hope y'all are really enjoying the conference and learned a lot of good stuff. I know I've had a good time here. So sorry y'all have to deal with me on the last day. I know y'all thought you had a break after yesterday of not hearing me talk, but hey, I'm back. So anyway, I want to get in and talk to y'all about drawing files and how we can use those in ArcPro. I started off my career as a surveyor, working at survey crews and working a lot with AutoCAD. I actually started with AutoCAD 12 in DOS. For those that remember, we didn't always have this nice GUI. We had to type things to get things to happen. So, my world was AutoCAD, and I used AutoCAD for a number of years, including, well, I shouldn't say including, because MicroStation is not AutoCAD. And I'm sorry for anybody that may have been offended that I related the two, regardless of what side of the fence you happen to be on. But I learned very quickly how to move data back and forth between these. And I thought that was a normal thing. What I found, though, is a lot of folks in our community have never touched AutoCAD, have never seen AutoCAD. And so when they get data in from a surveyor or an engineer and have to try to bring that into the GIS, they get lost because they don't really understand it. So that's what I want to talk about. Why are we using different data? Why doesn't the folks in the engineering survey world use the same formats we do and vice versa? Why is that? And then we'll talk a little bit about what is the structure? How does somebody build a CAD file? What does it take? What's inside of it? And then I'm going to try to show y'all how to use it in ArcPro. That was supposed to be a live demo. Since we don't have ArcPro in this one, I quickly tried to record a video literally out there at our booth this morning. So we'll see how well that goes there. So why are they separate? Why doesn't the engineering survey community use geodatabases and shapefiles like we do? And why don't we just use DWG files or DGN files? Well, they're designed for two very different things, right? In the GIS community, we're looking at large areas. We're looking at cities, we're looking at counties, we're looking at states, we're looking at regions. So we're dealing with much larger areas because we're interested in knowing what's the relationship between the parcels and the sewer system and the water system and the zoning and the census and so forth and so on. Whereas on the engineering surveying side, they're project focused. Where am I building this new water treatment plant? Where am I doing this new road project or this new bridge or things like that? So they don't really care how that relates to things outside the project. They're really focused on the relationships in that project. So in GIS, we're dealing with, gigabytes, terabytes, even petabytes of data because we're looking at a much larger area. And we're also looking at a lot of different data. We're bringing in raster, we're bringing in vector, we're bringing in things like point clouds, we're bringing in data tables, right? And some of this stuff is stuff we create. Some of it we're going out to NC1 map. Some of it we're going out to ArcGIS Online. Some of it we're going to other REST services coming from the federal government. And we're having to combine all that stuff together. On the other side of the fence, they may start with some of this, right? And I've, again, worked for an engineering firm for a number of years. And yeah, we would do a lot of initial research and pull data from some of those same kind of sites. But when we got down to brass tacks and we start getting to the design phase, we're going out and collecting all that data ourselves because we want to make sure it's correct. Well, at least correct as we think it's correct. I'm not saying it's all correct. I've seen some bad things. I'm not even talking about some of the bad things I've seen. Anyway, right? So they're dealing with much smaller data sets. They're, in megabytes, right? Anybody, how many of y'all have used AutoCAD? Just show of hands. Okay, so wow, that's a lot more than I thought. What happens in AutoCAD when you open a very large file? Nothing. Exactly. It crashes, it implodes, right? And that's because it's not designed to handle that size because it's not for that purpose in there. So that's part of the reason we're doing it, right? So why these two things are separate. We're using them for very different purposes. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean in GIS we can't use CAD data. We absolutely can use CAD data. ArcGIS Pro, ArcMap, you can pull in a DWG file. You can pull in a DGN file, a DXF file. By the way, what I'm talking about here mostly is focused around AutoCAD because that's what I'm most familiar with. But in the Esri world, Esri thinks a DGN, a DWG, and a DXF are all the same thing and tries to treat them like that. Those that have used MicroStation know that's not true, but Esri thinks it is. So I'm not going to argue with Jack too much. Okay. So a couple things we need to know when you're looking at bringing in this DWG. They can contain multiple entity types. So in a single drawing file, and you can see in this graphic over here, I'm looking at the subdivision _NADA3 drawing file in ArcPro. And you can see all the feature classes. By the way, if you use the term feature class to a CAD operator, CAD drafter, whatever, they're not going to have any idea what you're talking about. So that's why I'm calling them entity types. Right? So you can see points, lines, and polygons, annotation, multi-patch, networks, all in a single drawing. So a single drawing file can contain a lot of data. A lot of information can be in there. Now, not only can you store spatial data in here, you can store graphics. So in AutoCAD, we have two different ways of looking at data. We have model space and we have paper space. To relate that back to terms, I'm going to do ArcMap because it's a little easier, where you have data view and layout view. So data view is the same as model space. Layout view is the same as paper space in general concepts there. But in paper space, I can go in and put graphics. I can put charts. I can put title blocks, north arrows, legends, and all that in there. So there can be a lot of that information in there. Now, we can also store attributes. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they were saying that the CAD can't store attributes. And that's not really true. There are basic CAD attributes. You're going to have things like what layer the feature's on, what line type is it assigned, what color is it frozen, is it thawed, is it visible, not visible, do you print it, do you not print it, and so on. We'll look at some of the attributes there in a minute. But there's other ways we can do that. We can create something called a block. So a block is a point feature. That block can define the it will define the symbology for that feature. So I can create a block for a valve or a hydrant, and that's going to define what that looks like in the CAD drawing. But I can also assign attributes. So if I create that block for fire hydrant, I can add block attributes. What's the manufacturer of the hydrant? How many outlets does it have on it? When was it installed? So very similar to the attributes we create in GIS, we can do that for blocks, but that only applies to point features. Okay. And ArcGIS blocks have been around for as long. I know back in 12, I used blocks, and I think they were back even before that there. So we can read those into GIS, and we bring them the point layer that's in with those blocks, and all those block attributes are going to come across as well. Sad thing is, I think they're using a lot of CAD users nowadays that don't even know how to create a block or what one is, but it is a way to do it. Now, if you're running a higher vertical that's built on top of AutoCAD, like Map or Civil 3D, it also has the ability to create object data tables. These are like the attribute tables that we're used to, right? We can go in and define the fields and what they're going to be, and then we can link those back to the features, just like we kind of do in GIS. The downside to this is that, well, there's two. One, you have to have these higher levels of AutoCAD. You cannot do that in plain AutoCAD or AutoCAD Lite. Also, well, I haven't checked this very recently because Esri's done some good improvements in Pro on how it handles CAD files, but you could not see those object data tables. You actually had to go from Map or Civil 3D, export out from their export routines into a shape file or something else to be able to get to that data. I said I haven't had a drawing file that has object data in it recently to check with the newest version of ArcPro to see if it can read this out. Okay. Another issue we have is reference files. So, in GIS, you know how each layer references back to a data source. Well, in a drawing, I can kind of do the same thing. We call these XREFs, and this is very common. Say I'm going to create I want to print the entire set of plans for a given project. So I've got the engineer drawings over here. I've got landscape architect here. I've got surveyor here. I've got architect over here. And I want to combine all those together to do one set of plans. So I'll XREF those in to create a master set, a master plan. And so it references all those in, and then I can print them. So the problem is, obviously, if you only get the master drawing and it has all these XREFs, you don't have that data either. Now, the nice thing of the new version of Pro is it'll tell you that that drawing had XREFs. So if you see data's missing, you'll know it. Older versions in ArcMap would never tell you that there was an XREF. It didn't even know what one is. So that's important to know. And then the other part to this, and you see this, is when you look at it in Pro or even ArcMap, they all are identified by blue icons there. That's how you know you're working with the drawing file. And then lastly, I want to mention, there's a big difference between use and edit. Okay? I can use a drawing file in ArcPro. I can bring it in, I can look at it, I can symbolize it, change symbology properties, I can query it, do all those things. I cannot edit the data in the CAD file. If I want to edit the data, I have to convert it to a GIS format via the geodatabase feature class or a shape file. Then I can edit the data, but I'm still not editing the drawing file. The drawing file is now disconnected because I've run that conversion. So that is something important to know. Okay, so now let's talk about layers. In CAD, we organize data in the drawing by layers, and there's no limit to the number of layers you can put in a drawing. You can name it whatever you want. The big issue we run into from the GIS side is the fact in AutoCAD, just because I call something the sewer line layer, doesn't mean I only put sewer lines on there. I can put annotation, like the size of the line and the material it's made of. I may accidentally drop the block for the manhole onto the sewer line layer and not necessarily realize I did it because that was the current or active layer when I did that. So this becomes problematic because in GIS, if you've never done CAD, you'll never understand this. Why am I getting these weird things on this layer? It says it's sewer line. Why am I getting water lines on here? Right? So, because there's no enforcement of just because you name it, it's supposed to store this, that it has to store that. And that's just so alien to us because we're very, if it says sewer line, we only put lines in it, we're only going to do that. That's not in CAD. Matter of fact, in CAD, and I've seen this done, I can do everything in one layer. So when you create a new CAD file, it starts with layer 0. You can draw everything in layer 0 and individually as I draw a line. Okay, I want this line to be red and dashed. I want this point to be an X and be blue. You can individually control those features. And I've seen that happen. How many of y'all have digital data submission standards? A couple of y'all. So this is where you got to be careful. I've seen cities and counties that will require engineers and surveyors to submit a digital version of their project in a DWG or DGN format. And they don't give you any spec. It just has to be in that format and has to be tied to the state plane coordinate system. Well, there's certain individuals that don't like to give up their data because they think they own that data and they have proprietary rights to that data and so forth and so on. So like, oh, fine, you're not going to give me, that's all the requirement. You're going to force me to do that. Here, I'm going to flatten everything to layer 0. Everything's the same color. Everything's the same line type. There's no differentiation. Here, you have fun. They met the spec. You have to accept it. So a little word of warning there. Some issues we often run into with this, working with some of these besides the layer issue that I just talked about, is sometimes, well, quite frequently, you'll find these things aren't georeferenced. Okay, and this gets back to the fact it's project focused. Everything in the drawing itself on the project is very accurate and relative to itself. The distances, the angles, and all that are correct. It's not tied to a state plane coordinate. They don't have to. Now, with the ever increasing use of GPS equipment, this is becoming an issue. But back in the 80s and 90s, when I first started doing this, trying to tie things into state plane or latitude and longitude was a real pain. We could find a monument, we'd have to traverse to the monument. That cost a lot of money, and a lot of folks didn't want to pay for that. Or we'd have to take celestial observations, which we've done there. But literally go out at a project, we'd set a nail in the ground and say, you're on my first control point. I hereby grant you coordinates 5,000, 5,000. And you would take off from there. And again, data was great, worked perfect for engineering stuff, but not for us. So you'll have that. Another issue we encounter is version. So just like Esri likes to change the geodatabase with new releases of software, Autodesk does the same thing. About every 3 or so versions of AutoCAD that come out, they'll change the DWG. it takes Esri a while to be able to update ArcGIS so it can read that new version. In the past, this was a big issue. It would take anywhere from 6 to 12 months when a new version came out for Esri to be able to read it. And that's because Autodesk and Esri, well, they hated each other, kind of like Apple and Microsoft. And I can tell you the whole story behind that if anybody's interested later. But because they used to play nice. Back in the 90s, they actually had a joint product called ArcCAD. It was wonderful. It was the best GIS software I've ever used. And then things happened and they didn't. Anyway, so Esri would have to reverse engineer that new format. So they'd have to get copies of files in the new format, take it all apart, figure out what changed, then update it. But now the two companies are working more together. You know, they were talking about the digital twin. Esri and Autodesk have been working very closely on BIM products and GeoBIM and things like that. So they're actually talking and sharing with one another. So it takes less time for that to happen, but it does happen. I already mentioned that there's parts of the drawing file that are not accessible. I mentioned the object data tables potentially not being accessible in paper space. So anything stored in paper space is not accessible in ArcGIS, whether it's ArcMap or ArcPro in there. So there are some issues that we have in common or that pop up when we're trying to do that. So let's see here if I can get my video to play. So here, I'm not sure how well you can see this, but I'm bringing in over here, I'm accessing the CAD files. You can see I've got two subdivision files in here, opening up, you see all the different classes that are in that single drawing file. Now you can bring the entire drawing in. What I found is that is counterproductive because it's too much. So pick what you need to bring. I brought in the single polyline feature class in. When I do, it creates a group layer. So it will actually read the layers that are included in the drawing and create separate layers in the group layer. So if I go over here and open the table, so these are some of the attributes that are in there, but look at the layer, there's parcels. I've got a parcels layer here. I'm scrolling down, it's right away. I've got a right away layer down here. Waterline, I've got a waterline layer here. So it's automatically reading and generating those in Pro for me. I also have just a generic one up here that this is everything kind of in that drawing, not broken out by individual layers, right? So with that, closing that out, I'm going to go up. What am I going to do next? I have to remember what I did this morning. So showing you I can do a query. So just like you can query shapefiles or geodatabase feature class layers, you go in, do new selections, set the layer I'm trying to query by. I'm doing the right away layer, this one here, the layer is right away. And go, okay, so it's going ahead and selecting those features. So I can select features. And once I have features selected, I can do various things with them. One of the things I can do is copy data from that CAD file and then paste it using Paste Special. Hurry up, Tripp, get going. So I can paste it in a specific template or into a specific layer and go, okay, so it literally takes the data, copies it out of the CAD file and puts it into my existing GIS. So I can extract the components out of it that I need. Okay? So, but I can do more of that. You can see here where it moved, I had the 262 selected and it moved them here to my GIS layer. Okay, but I can do more. I can actually use CAD data to edit my GIS data. So here you can see the result right away moving into the GIS. I like doing the video instead of the real demo because I know it's going to work. Always, you know, somebody's doing a fake software demo when nothing goes wrong, right? So I won't mention that when I was recording the video, I had a couple of issues. So up there, I was able to edit out real quick. Anyway, so I'm going in, I'm setting up what I'm have selectable. I set parcels to not be selectable or and right-of-ways to be selectable. And now I'm going to my split tool. So what I'm trying to do is there's a parent parcel under this new subdivision that I want to split out to the individual lots. So I'm going to use this CAD data to do that using the split tool by feature. First thing I'm going to do is select my input. These are the features I'm using to split or cut up the polygon. I've got those selected. Next, I'm going to go to the target. What is the polygon I'm going to split? Oh, I forgot I didn't have it selectable. make it selectable. So I'm going to do that. You see it's done that, and I hit split. So what that's done now is it used the CAD data, and but what that's done, you can see it's now generated 108 polygons like that. Very fast, very efficient way to do that. And you see here the individual ones, and then I can pull up right away really quickly if I wanted to there. So again, some good ways we can make use of CAD data even without converting it. Like I'm editing the GIS data. So what does that do? Oh, okay. So I'm adding in the other subdivision coming in here. Anyway, it said it was in an unknown coordinate system. This is not supposed to be georeferenced. I think I went back and fixed it. Let's see if I can fast forward through this. Probably cut this out a bit, but when you're editing on a small laptop screen, I actually have my own YouTube channel if anybody's interested and want to see me restoring a 67 Mustang. 67 Stang on YouTube if you want to do that. Yeah, I thought I had. By the way, if you ever deal with ArcPro and it acts wonky, just close it out and reopen it. And wonky is the technical term. Okay, here we go. We're back to square one. So what I'm going to do here is bring in another CAD file for a subdivision that's up on the north side of this is the beautiful city of Tripp, by the way. For anybody that's taken classes from me and before, you probably recognize this. Trippville is a city that exists in an alternate reality in the state of Georgia, over near Six Flags on the west side of Atlanta. So again, I'm bringing this CAD file in. It's giving me the warning up here that the data source has no coordinate system assigned, so this is a non-geo-referenced file. Which if I go in and zoom to that layer, you can see it's coming in down here. It's actually popping into Mississippi somewhere.
Tripp, can you take the mic with you when you wander? Because we lose you every time in the virtual.
Oh, sorry. I'm not used to being tied to a poking mic.
No, you're fine.
Anyway, so you can see, again, the CAD file came up way down here. My data is up here. So I need to get that over there. So I've got a bookmark to show where the subdivision is. There. So now the next thing I need to do is georeference the thing. So I go to CAD data, hit the georeferencing button, which opens the georeferencing tab. First thing I like to do is I move it up into the general location. So I click move to display. It then automatically shifts the CAD file up into the location. Next, I need to identify control points. Right? Now in ArcPro and ArcMap, you can only pick 2 control points for georeferencing a CAD file. I don't know why. I don't like it. I disagree with it, but that's how Esri does it. So, and it's always best to pick 2 that are kind of diagonally opposite one another, not really close and not along the same line. It gives you a much better solution. So I pick this upper corner in the northwest to that corner, and I'm going to go to the southeast and pick the same corners that match up, make sure I still have the control point tool active, and it goes from red to green. Now that I've picked those control points, I'm going to zoom back out so you can see that, and then I'll hit the apply button. And now it applies that georeferencing solution. When it does that, it's I'm going to be hitting save here in just a second, but it's generating 2 files. It's generating a WLD, a world file, and it's going to generate a PRJ, sorry, a projection file. So when I do this, it knows anytime I add this into another map, it's automatically going to put it in the right spot because it's going to know the translation it's got to do on that CAD file to display it correctly in ArcGIS. And it's also going to know what projection that georeferencing was done in Georgia, in this case, Georgia State Plane at 83, right? So any other drawing, any other time I use this drawing or any other feature classes in the drawing, it doesn't just georeference the polyline, it's the whole drawing. So at this point, any other layer I bring in from that drawing is going to come in the right location.
Okay, you have your design specs from the drawing you bring
Yep.
in. When you pick those 2 points, does that have potential to corrupt the actual design data, the line lengths?
No, you're not actually, because you're not editing the actual CAD file. You're creating some external files that ArcPro and ArcMap is using to display that data. But the internal CAD data is correct in and of itself. You haven't done any edits to it.
So if I'm going to attribute dimensions from those lines, that's the true dimension. That's the point.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. If you're going to attribute those, then you're going to have to convert it to GIS, and the new GIS data is going to be based on that georeferencing location. So the rotation and the scale will have been adjusted, so it will not necessarily match what was in the original CAD file. So from that perspective, if you're directly attributing it from the drawing itself, then they can be different, right? So
250 dimensions in a subdivision like that, and they're not necessarily valid once I bring it in like that. I have to audit all of them to make sure that my dimensions are going to be correct for when I publish.
correct, if you do it just this way. Now, if you're using something like the parcel fabric, there are ways of tying things down to specific control points that would minimize that from happening. This is just plain rough. I'm not applying any spatial rules or
Well, building your polygons, all that's perfectly fine.
Yep.
You want your attributes to be
Correct.
what the spec is.
Yep.
And you want to be able to attribute from the lines.
Yep.
But now you've corrupted the lines, so you have to.
now.
You're going to have to figure out how to make adjustments in what you do.
Yeah.
You want to get your polygons built, but you want to get your attributes right. So
You're right. There's
You know,
some definite
have to
thought in
play
that level. You're right. Yep.
Thank you, Tripp. I was gonna say, it's not really a question, but to kind of streamline the process, I've been using files from MicroStation and ORD.
Mm-hmm.
In the contents pane, before you bring in your drawing, you can open the properties of the DGN file or DWG file and project from the properties layer. And it's a section that validates the geo or the projection, and then you'll change the projection before you even bring it in. So you're not getting where it brings it into Mississippi and then you got to readjust.
Well,
You just go
that,
straight from the contents pane.
that
and then
you're right.
project.
That works if the drawing, whether it's DWG or DGN, is actually created in a real world coordinate system. If it's in an assumed, like the example of just sticking the nail in the ground and going, it's 5,000, 5,000, then that won't work. Another thing I've noticed with the new version of ArcPro is that in AutoCAD, at least, in map or civil 3D, I actually assign the coordinate system to the drawing in that application. ArcPro is now able to read that. Whereas in the past, if there wasn't a PRJ file, it had no idea. But if the drawing itself is assigned in the drawing, even if there's no PRJ, it will actually pick that up, which is a nice improvement than we have in the past.
I'll note with that, just because I didn't realize how much this was going to trigger me from past nightmares. A lot of stuff in the past was drawn from 0.00 in CAD because it was project based.
Yep.
And it's crazy to think about the way we think about things in real space.
Oh, and kind of getting back to the attribute thing, if the drawing itself has those dimensions listed in the drawing, there are ways to bring those dimensions also right out of the drawing file into your GIS.
Well,
So
one
can
thing
maintain
we might do is you have your in the arc process, you have your length, your arc length.
Yeah.
But we update the COGO attributes. So we have the COGO attributes.
Yep.
And we'll bring them in. So I'm thinking if we were to update the COGO attributes before you reproject it to where you want it to be, even if you reproject it, the COGO attributes hopefully would be static.
Yeah, they can be, because that's, if you looked at that southern subdivision, there's a feature class, and I'm
Right.
using the GIS term, it was COGO. So now we are able to read those COGO attributes that are created in Civil 3D or map and bring those in and maintain that information.
Yeah, so what I said I do is when I first bring it in, and it's not projected right, but I first
Yep.
bring it in, the first thing I do is I select all those lines, update COGO attributes, and I got them.
Yep.
Then when I reproject them, regardless of how they've been rubber sheeted, when I go ahead and attribute, I'm pulling the true COGO attributes in.
Yeah.
So that's all.
Yep.
Thank
Yeah. Good, good.
We also note that our parcels are for entertainment use only.
Like one of the questions that I had was mostly for MicroStation when we're bringing in like a lot of DOT files.
Mhm.
We work for the tax administration on trying to get the new
Yeah.
right-of-way lines and stuff like that. On the larger projects, like we have the I-95 expansion that goes county line to county line, they use a lot of localized stationing and trying to get DOT to reconvert those files to NC grid doesn't always work. So trying to get projections on those never quite come in right, especially if you're trying to do the geoprocessing. Is there any tricks that you know of getting those processes worked?
Not easily, because there's so many different ways they can do that. Did they apply ground to grid conversions and what transformations they might have used and all that? So I don't know of any automated way to deal with that. A lot of that still has to be done on an individual drawing basis. Actually, for something like that, I would probably, is Esri in the room? I would probably actually look at FME. They have a lot better. They have a lot of tools. I didn't say that. They have a lot of tools that are designed specifically for that type of situation. And I found that you can overcome some of those issues with FME that you might struggle with in the Esri environment. So I'll leave it at that.
Hi,
Just don't
morning.
contact.
With the work that I do, we're doing a lot, it's all forestry based. So if we get a CAD file in, like a DXF, there aren't any reference points. It's just trees and more trees. Is there any in the metadata of the DXF file? Would there be anything referencing what coordinate system it might have been drawn in? Because it's often a very specific state plane, and trying to communicate with a surveyor who is in the field a lot can be really difficult. Just getting them pinned down over email or trying to get a projection. Is there any way to find some sort of hint in the metadata, maybe, to where we can start looking?
No. Not, especially not in a DXF, because the DXF is a very simplified format. So when Autodesk first built the DWG, it was all proprietary, and they did not want to share that with anybody else. But they kind of were forced by the users that had to share data into a GIS or into MicroStation or something else. So that's when they came up with the DXF. So it's a very simplified format. So there's not a lot of ancillary information that gets stored in there. I mean, what I've had to do with data like that, and this is no fun, but you at least know what state it's in. So you open a map, you bring the drawing file in, it tells you there's no coordinate, and you just have to start trying different coordinate systems until it pops in. Oh yeah, there it is. There, and I've done that in Canada and elsewhere. So
I was at Fort Hood before I came to North Carolina, and we had Fort Hood projected into like 20 different projections in a MXD, and we would just drop the data in whichever projection it showed up in. You would know it's that projection. So if you have that kind, yeah, this actually worked.
So yeah, if you're working in a limited area, that helps. If you're like me, a consultant working across the U.S. and into Canada, I don't always I can't do that. But the other thing you can get is people that say it's absolutely in North Carolina State Plane Nat 83, and you're like, it can't be. It's not coming in, right? And they tried to project it from 27 to 83, and instead of using the project tool, they used the define projection tool and just created a new PRJ that was wrong. So I encountered those fun things. I had fun getting in the middle of a city in a parish in Louisiana. I was teaching a class for both of them, and they each swore their data was right, but they were coming up like this. And I found out the city was wrong and the parish was right, but they weren't happy with that. But guys, here's the proof. When I change yours, when I actually project it, look, they line up, and they line up with every data too. I think it's anyway. Any other good questions? Okay, folks. Well, thank you so much. I've enjoyed it.